Thank you all for coming today. My name's Cyndi Charney. I'm with the Chichester Historical Society, and today we're going to be talking about Tina Sloan Green. I learned about Tina when I was doing research of Excelsior Village in Upper Chichester Township. I came across an article in the newspapers that mentioned this young woman who was on the United States women's national field hockey team. Well, that piqued my curiosity, and I started to dig a little deeper, and I learned quite a bit more about Tina and her impressive career. So Tina broke color barriers throughout her career as a player, athlete, teacher, and a coach. Some of the highlights of her career are that in 1969, she was the first African American to play for the United States women's national field hockey team, which is how I discovered her. When she was hired by Temple University in 1975, she became the first African American head coach of a women's college lacrosse team. During her coaching career, she led the Temple Owls to 3 national titles. Tina is one of 7 children born to Norwood and Sally Sloan. She was born in Philadelphia and spent her early childhood in the Eastwick section of the city, which we now know as Southwest Philadelphia. In 1958, during her first year of high school, the family moved to this home in Excelsior Village in Upper Chichester. Tina was a gifted and talented student and one of 20 African American young women accepted to Philadelphia High School for Girls, which, as I understand it, is one of the best schools in Philadelphia. She was a standout athlete at Girls High. Her phys ed teacher, Jane Weizenhofer, recognized her athleticism and recruited her to play basketball, volleyball, and field hockey. Before this, Tina had never played organized sports, if you can believe that. But upon graduation, her coach, Weizenhofer, encouraged her to attend Westchester State College, which we now know as Westchester State University, to play under Vonnie Groh. Coach Groh was one of the most renowned field hockey players in the world at the time. Under Coach Groh, Tina was a field hockey All-American at Westchester and the first African American to play for the United States women's national field hockey team from 1969 to 1973. There we see her playing field hockey at Westchester from the yearbook photos. And she also played badminton. During her sophomore year at Westchester, Coach Groh asked Tina to also play lacrosse. It was the first time Tina played. And in the mid-1960s, she was one of only a handful of black women playing the sport. Despite these challenges, Tina's decision to play would be the catalyst for her many future successes and Hall of Fame career. There she is graduating. After completing her Bachelor of Physical Education at Westchester in 1966, Tina was hired by the Chadds Ford Unionville School District, and she became the first African American to teach at Unionville High School. During her years there, she organized and coached the school's first lacrosse team, and she was an assistant basketball coach and a phys ed teacher. She also worked at William Penn High School for Girls as a teacher and an assistant coach. In 1969, during her early teaching career, Tina became the first African American named to the women's lacrosse team. She played on the touring teams for 4 years, traveling to places like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and England. So she got to travel the world. She was still touring when she joined Lincoln University as an instructor of physical education in 1970. She served as an assistant coach for women's tennis and women's volleyball programs before becoming Lincoln's first head women's basketball coach, leading the squad from 1971 to 1975. She also started a short-lived women's lacrosse program in 1971, the first women's lacrosse program ever at an HBCU. In 1974, Temple University hired her to coach badminton and field hockey. You can see here, this is during her field hockey coaching career. The following year, when Temple offered her the position, she became the first African-American head coach in women's college lacrosse history. Even though expectations weren't high, Tina felt a lot of pressure. She said, when you're the first, everybody looks at you. If you mess up, That's the end for everybody. It added pressure to make sure that I did an outstanding job. Well, Temple won one game in her first season, but Tina worked hard to recruit talent to the program. By the end of 1979, she had given up badminton and field hockey and was focusing primarily on lacrosse. With the enactment of Title IX and the ability to offer scholarships, along with her recruiting efforts, the program grew, and her efforts were rewarded. She's the only Temple coach to win 3 national titles. She led the Owls to 1 AIAW title in 1982. That was the predecessor organization to the NCAA, and 2 NCAA titles in 1984 and 1988. Her best season came in 1988 with a 19-0 record, culminating with a 15-7 win over Penn State for the NCAA championship. She also had a record-setting 29-game winning streak in the 1983-84 and 1984-85 seasons, and took the team to 11 consecutive NCAA Final Four appearances. After 18 years of coaching, Tina retired in 1992 with an outstanding record of 207 wins, 62 losses, and 4 ties. But coaching wasn't Tina's only interest. Early in her career at Temple, Tina was one of 4 black women trailblazers that recognized the scarcity of black women in sports. They organized the Black Women in Sport Foundation, known as BWSF, whose mission it is to increase the involvement of black women and girls in all aspects of sport, including athletics, coaching, and administration. Tina has served as president of the nonprofit since it was formally organized in 1992. Tina's honors and achievements are many. She's co-authored 2 books, Black Women in Sport and Modern Women's Lacrosse. Her accomplishments have been recognized with countless awards and Hall of Fame inductions. And here on this timeline, if you go through it, you'll see that there's almost a full page of those types of honors for her. Today, Tina is Professor Emeritus in the College of Education at Temple, and she's still president of BWS. And just to close, Tina broke more than just color barriers. She was a pioneer, and she continues to pave the way for future generations of black women athletes through the work she does with BWSF. So that concludes my facts, dates and names, etc. So we can move on to any questions that you might have.
Okay. So Tina seemed very resilient, but how did she deal with the pressure of being the first, having to be the pioneer?
That's a very good question. Tina talks in the interviews that I've read that she's given about feeling like she actually lived in 2 worlds. She said, to quote her, she said, "I had to live in 2 worlds to be successful. I had to live in the white world, I had to live in the black world." So she felt that pressure, not just of the competition. She apparently loves competition, loves to win, and that drove her. But she also felt this pull going back and forth from one community to another. And if you look at these pictures early on in her college career, and if you look at this photo, you'll see everyone's white except Tina. And so this is what she was referring to. She's in this white community, and looks around, and she's the only one. But if you also look at there's a photo in here of her in the championship. This is 1988. You can see now, here she is, the black coach, and there are 3 black players. So though the numbers are still probably not representative of the community, especially in the city of Philadelphia, you can see that she did make a difference, and that there's not just one person, one black person any longer. The other thing that she said that I found really interesting when she went to work at Lincoln University is it felt good to be black. So she felt very comfortable being able to, be herself because she often felt misunderstood. That's another thing that she mentioned. But great question.
Did she ever feel like quitting?
I never once heard anything negative like that. It's a good question because she could have, winning one game in her first season of lacrosse. Recruiting was a problem. Lacrosse was a game that was played by the prep schools, right, by the private schools. It wasn't really a sport that was accessible to inner city or public school children. And so her recruitment efforts were really important. The other thing I read in my readings and listening to her talk, she's very positive, right? She never talked about negative, about how it felt to lose. She just didn't focus on that at all. Any other questions?
Does she still live in the Chichester area?
She does not. She lived here during her high school and college years. I'm not sure if she moved out of her family home before or after she was married, but after her parents passed, she acquired the house that I showed you earlier in Excelsior Village, and she owned that house until 2021, even though she didn't live there. So recently, and it was the family home, so I'm sure she was here often.
I wonder did Tina have any other interests besides like sports and coaching?
It's a good question too, and I'm not sure there are any other interests. She's very focused.
Yeah, I assume that's like very time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, she said that when she was a student, she was very studious, focused on her education. She did marry. She married Frank Green. Frank was is a Tuskegee alumnus. He was a track star. They married, had 2 children. Their daughter is the tennis coach at Harvard University, and their son is an NCAA tennis champion, and he currently teaches elite tennis in Philadelphia. So I know that her family was her interest as well, but she does a lot of this coaching, in her spare time. She's in her late 70s now, still lives in Philadelphia. But those are the only interests in all the interviews I read that I found for her.
Seems sports fun in the family.
For sure.
How does she feel about competing?
Her husband, in an interview recently, said there's 2 things she loves: winning and money. So she felt very strongly about competing and winning. And his comment about her loving the money was about the money in the sport and the recruiting and the scholarships to get it and fundraising for the BWSF. It wasn't for her personal gain, it was to enhance the sport.
Did she still do like coaching around?
Yes, I was trying to remember the name of the organization. There's a young woman from Radnor who started lacrosse, which I think is like intramural, or it's a competition type league. She helps with that. She still helps with the BWSF. And in this photo in particular, she mentions that this truly was one of the most rewarding moments in sports for her, because was her goal and her vision to bring sports like lacrosse to the public schools in Philadelphia. She talked about, during practices on the field at Temple, she could see these young girls looking through the fence, watching them play. The girls couldn't come in the field. They didn't have the opportunity to play in their own schools, but Tina wanted to bring that to them. And through the BWSF and collaborating with the school district, mentors, donors, etc., they were able to achieve that. And here in this photo, this is a ceremonial picture, a ceremonial pose, but she went from the little girls on the other side of the fence to the girls being in the fence and part of the game.
Now, what made you decide to select Mrs. Green?
It's a good question. We went through a discussion, Aisha and Drew and I, about some of the prominent African-American citizens in Upper Chichester, and she is one of them. And when we found out that this group would be available to have this discussion, I thought the fact that she was a young woman growing up in Upper Chi and probably had some similar life experiences that you might be most interested in her than some of the others I had in mind.
Yeah, I agree that it's good because I'm very like currently interested in like sports and stuff at my school. So like learning this information about like her being the first pioneer and like seeing color in sports, it's like very like interesting to me since it relates.
Yeah, one of the more interesting things I found about her is that she was a strategist, right? You expect that in a coach, right? They have to think ahead and plan out the game. But she did that with the vision of where she wanted to go. You asked about winning and competition. She saw opportunity, right? She wins one game, lacrosse. But Title IX, are you familiar with Title IX? It's really women's equality in sports. So in the 70s, there wasn't a requirement for schools to provide access to the same resources to girls' sports as there was to boys. So Title IX passes, it's an equality law, and it requires that the girls have the same access to scholarships, admissions, resources, uniforms, etc. And because of that, Tina was able to offer scholarships now to incoming students. And so that was one of her recruitment tools. Another of her recruitment tools was her network. The women that she met at Westchester who went on to become gym teachers, phys ed teachers, were some of the people she relied on. They became her friends, and they would tell her when they had talent. So those girls would come, and Tina would recruit them to come to play at Temple. The other thing she did was have summer camps. She had a summer camp for lacrosse in Chester with the YWCA, and she did that later in her career to try to, teach these girls how to play so that when the opportunity came to school, they could apply for scholarships and get to play at Temple for her. And you can see how successful she was in her recruitment. But she was really a strategist and a visionary.
Did she ever talk about not just like being black and doing sports, but like also being a female and doing sports, like those problems, or no?
She does, and I have a quote here from her. Great question. She said, "Talent has no color, talent has no gender." The other thing she talks about is her coaches, and she says, "My coaches were responsible for my success. They saw talent and they didn't see anything else." So she didn't, in the positive nature that she is, she didn't ever say, well, the boys got this and we didn't. She talked about what she was able to do and achieve. The only thing she did say about that was regarding Title IX. She said women athletes shared a locker room with the general student population. So imagine if you're playing a sport in high school and you've got to use the same locker room as the gym classes. But she said we kept the same uniforms for 5, 6, sometimes 7 years, which is long in a uniform that you're using, for a physical activity. She says most significant, there were no scholarships for women's athletes, which we just talked about. She says, but following Title IX and more talk about equality, and now we're talking about gender equality, women versus men, we began to see some changes, and the number one thing we experienced was access to scholarships. So she talks about the money and how it makes a difference, because college sports are pay to play. And she wanted to open doors so that young women could access those opportunities, because she believed that these student athletes were the ones who would eventually become, end up in the boardroom, right? Where, we know that was always a male-dominated, place to be. But her goal was to see more women, and she believed that women could access those opportunities through athletics. It's a good question, thank you.
Did anyone ever tell her no or try to make her doubt herself?
I believe so. Now again, she rarely would talk about anything like that, but in one case she said while she was touring with the the women's field hockey team. She was on that team with some of her coaches. So it wasn't just college, or it was her lacrosse. And she said someone asked one of her coaches, does she do drugs? Now, Tina was a good student. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she was athletic. And the only thing I can think that prompted that question was racism, right? Why would you pick out the girl in the corner writing love letters to her boyfriend at Tuskegee and ask a question like that, right? So the other thing, and she never talked about this, was that the first year that she won the national championship, she was not chosen as Coach of the Year. In a newspaper article, they suggested that it was racism, that, you know, discrimination, that they chose a white coach and not Tina. I couldn't validate that, I couldn't confirm that, but ironically, the same organization that didn't give her Coach of the Year in 1982, later, it's the IWLCA, created an award just for Tina. It's the Tina Sloan Award, and they have no other awards for any other coaches or individuals. So I thought, if in fact that reporter was correct, that was an oversight and they overlooked her, then they certainly did recognize the mistake and make up for it later.
What year did she get inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Oh boy. Let's see, which Hall of Fame? So we can run through these, but she got into Temple's Hall of Fame in 1994, the U.S. National Lacrosse Hall of Fame in 97, the International Women's Sports Hall of Fame in 99. She got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Collegiate Women Athletic Administrators in 2008. And then they go on and on. She was inducted into the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame in 2013. Lifetime Achievement Award from Comcast Sportsnet Philadelphia in 2015. She received a Tewaaraton Award, which is a lacrosse award, a big one, 2016. She was inducted into the IWLCA Hall of Fame, the Coaches Hall of Fame in 2017. Lincoln University inducted her in 2019. I think Westchester was first, 1988. So she has many, many Hall of Fame inductions. And you know, these are other images throughout her career. Some of them I had on the slides, but you're welcome to look through them as well. These are her college. These are her college, most of her college. And there's William Penn. I found her photos from the yearbooks.
I have a question.
Sure.
Has she ever said like she felt mistreated by her other teammates because she was black?
She never did, and that's what really struck me about her, you know, and her positivity that I talked about earlier. She never went there. She always talked about her visions and what she hoped to accomplish, which is pretty impressive because I'm sure there were times when she was mistreated, probably because of her color. This I thought was interesting. So this was her high school gym teacher, Jane Weitzenhofer, who encouraged her to go to Westchester, and she was teaching at the same time.
Wow.
She moved to William Penn High School from Girls High,
Okay.
and there's one of these has a photo of Coach Vonnie Groh, also one of the Westchester ones.
Right. Since I'm in my 70s and I went to a predominantly white nursing school. In fact, I was the second to graduate. So I could understand when you mentioned about the two different worlds, because I went as a registered nurse, and back then you had to be an LPN first, and it was a color barrier. And when you were saying that kind of struck me, and as a mature woman now working, the pendulum sometimes it still swings.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what Tina said as well. She didn't think that the Black Women in Sport Foundation would be needed you know, in the 2020s, and unfortunately, you know, it hasn't swung far enough yet.
Exactly. Well, I graduated from nursing school in 1975, so I went because I was 21 when I went to nursing school. Because in our family, the males went to school before the females. That's how it was in my particular family. But I worked in the burn center, and my favorite was community health nursing.
Yeah.
My first job was at St. Agnes Hospital in Philadelphia.
How about that? That's awesome. You mentioned about the boys going first. That's one of the things that Tina mentioned in her recruitment is the fathers brought the daughters to school, and the fathers decided where their daughters would go to school back then. So, you know, she had to convince the fathers that their daughters should go to Temple. It's interesting that you have that parallel.
Yes.
I think as a person that does sports, I think this is like never to give up, no matter like what somebody says or like how they judge you, you know?
Yeah, especially when you hear that she goes from winning one game to winning 3 national championships. Clearly her persistence paid off.
This talk has inspired me to think more positive and don't doubt myself. So, yeah, thank you.
From learning this story about Tina, well, like learning new things about like Black history, it's like always like amazing to me because like I feel like history repeats and like I don't know. But Tina, like it makes me like want to try more for like passions that I'm interested in, like at school maybe, or like to go further and like commit to like different paths I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Tina did. I mean, whether or not she had the confidence or the experience, when her coach said, come play sports at high school, she did. And, you know, other people can recognize strengths in you that you may not see yourself. And, you know, that might be all the encouragement that you need to, you know, take a path that will lead to the successes like she's seen.